So first, a caveat. As I prepared this sermon, I kept returning to words that are not always common in Unitarian Universalist congregations. I don't know if you use them here. And if it's necessary for you, I invite you to turn on that mental find and replace function that we so often use in our churches. And I invite you to listen for the truth that's hiding behind the words. That's all that we try to do as we preach. A woman I will call Khadijah was hospitalized after a suicide attempt. At her request, I, the hospital chaplain, was sent to see her. We sat together in a sterile room and began to talk. And Khadijah had a lot of questions and wanted to share her story with me. She was raised Muslim, and in her young adulthood, she left that faith and became a Baptist. In her young adulthood, she also came to realize that she is a lesbian. While there are Muslims and Baptists who affirm and accept lesbians, those were not the Baptists and Muslims in her life. Khadijah got straight to the point with me. Do you believe I am an abomination because I am a lesbian? She asked. As a chaplain, as a minister, and as a person who listens to people in distress, I know that questions like this really aren't about my belief. They are about someone working through a bigger issue within themselves. Khadijah really didn't care what I thought. She was trying to work through her own belief and doubt. And had I been a textbook chaplain at that moment, I would have recognized that. And I would have paused and asked why she was wondering this. And I invite this as a technique for you all when someone comes at you with a theological or other important question. Just ask them, what's bringing this up? What's going on? Why is this present? Ask why they are wondering and what is the story behind their question. Because our direct answers to these sorts of questions help less than turning to wonder and asking about the story. But I didn't have the presence of mind to be a textbook chaplain at that moment. I responded to Khadijah's pain and anguish because it held my heart. And I told her, no, Khadijah, you are not an abomination. She told me that the religious leaders in her life and her family told her she's disgusting, an abomination, but she was uncertain. She felt God's love for her. She couldn't find Jesus saying anything about homosexuality in the Bible, which is because it's not in there. She knows in her core that she is whole and holy, loved and lovable just as she is. But the people in her life who say they speak for God are telling her otherwise. This was causing her so much pain. I told her that I don't believe she's an abomination, that people who share my faith don't believe she's an abomination, and that many people of different faiths and no faiths don't believe she is an abomination. This week, the death of Fred Phelps, the one-time leader of the Westboro Baptist Church of Topeka, Kansas, brings the question of God's love to the forefront in many of our minds. Fred devoted the final decades of his life to hatred, protesting funerals and holding up signs that I will not repeat, proclaiming that divine love is only for a few. As Unitarian Universalists, we don't agree on the big God questions, but we do believe that love is for all. There is nothing that people can do to separate them from love or make us unworthy of love. We are whole and holy, loved and lovable as we are. As Fred's life ends, we believe he and his family and his congregation are held by a great love that will not abandon them, even if they abandon love. Back to Khadijah. Over the following months, as Khadijah went through an outpatient mental health program, we met regularly. She grew to trust her sense of God's love and approval above what others told her. This transformation in Khadijah's understanding of herself is what salvation means to me. This is how our faith saves souls. We make salvation happen not in the next life, but in this life, in the struggles of all of us, most especially people who are told they are unworthy, unlovable, and unwelcome. This is why our Unitarian Universalist good news is important. This is why Unitarian Universalist evangelism is important, vital, life-saving. Right now, our message of love, our hope when hope is hard to find, is especially needed among our LGBT young people. It breaks my heart to say that Khadijah's story is very common. Estimates are that up to 12% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth and 30% of transgender young people have attempted suicide. So many of them are told that God hates them, that they are an abomination, unloved, and unlovable. While between 5 and 7% of teenagers are LGBT, estimates are that 40% of homeless teenagers are. These are young people who are both runaways from hostile families and thrown away by families who kick them out of the house after their sexual orientation or gender identity is disclosed or discovered. This suffering is the real abomination, made even more abominable because so much of it is the result of religious belief. We Unitarian Universalists are part of a tradition that has affirmed the worth and dignity of LGBT people for generations now. We do not believe that anyone is an abomination or deserves to be thrown away. We believe that all deserve love, no matter who we are, what we do, or who we love. As congregations, we covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This is a prophetic message. It is the good news we have to share and that we have to share with the world. This is the good news that people are quite literally dying to hear. Sharing the good news is not a phrase that comes up very often in Unitarian Universalist circles. Evangelism makes a lot of us uncomfortable, invoking images of door-to-door canvassers and fire and brimstone preaching. Just a few weeks ago, 2 young men knocked on the door of the congregation I serve in Nashville and told me their testimony in hopes of converting me and the congregation to their particular form of Christianity. That is not the only way to evangelize. Peter Morales, the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, and Don Southworth, the president of the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association, define evangelism as a religious orientation based on an eagerness to share something precious, to share our good news that wants and needs to be shared. We have precious good news in our congregations. There is something here that keeps you all coming back to this place week after week, something that motivates you to devote your time, talent, and treasure to this community, something that makes you bring in your yard sale donations to keep this place running. What is it? And who else needs it? Who are the people in this community searching for it? And how are you making yourselves easy to find? What might it mean to be an evangelist? I'm not suggesting you all go out and start knocking on doors or leaving pamphlets on the windshields at the supermarket, but if you want to, go ahead. Sometimes the good news is in the appearance of brownies after a death, but often our good news is found in the ideas and beliefs that we hold central, and it's hard to communicate that with baked goods. I have another story for you. This comes from Mark Morrison Reed, who's a retired UU minister and the preeminent scholar of the history of our faith among people of the African diaspora. If you have not read his book, Black Pioneers and White Denomination, I commend it to you. It's challenging and important history of the first Unitarian ministers of African descent. I heard Mark speak a few years ago, and he told the story of how his family came to our faith. When Mark was a boy, his father's co-worker invited him to the colleague's Unitarian congregation. This was in the 1950s, and these men were of different races. It was likely not easy for this white man to invite his black colleague to his church. It was likely not easy for Mark's father to accept the invitation and bring his family to that largely white congregation. But they both did something uncomfortable that brought the good news to Mark's family. The invitation from his father's colleague filled Mark's life with meaning. As a young adult, Mark felt called to ministry. He met his wife in seminary, and his life would be unrecognizable without Unitarian Universalism. And where would we all be without him? Without Mark Morrison Reed among us? We would have a much weaker understanding of the Black Unitarian Universalist experience and how it shapes our efforts to pursue racial justice to this day. Mark's ministry and his scholarship on the Black experience enriches us all. When I heard Mark speak, he shared his gratitude for his father's colleague's invitation 60 years ago and challenged us to think about the people whose lives we could transform or even save through similar invitations. The invitation that Mark's father received and the repercussions it had for Mark's life and our faith is another small salvation. Like Mark, I was brought to this faith as a child before I had any choice. Because of this, I'm fascinated by how people come to our faith, and there is no shortage of stories about this. About 90% of adult Unitarian Universalists are come-inners, raised in other religious traditions or no tradition. A common thread in the stories I hear is that people come to our faith through learning. They discover Henry David Thoreau or Ralph Waldo Emerson, and then learn that we are the heirs of the transcendentalist tradition. They learn about us in a history class. They take the Belief-O-Matic quiz on the BeliefNet website. It tells them they score high in Unitarian Universalism, and then they Google to find the local congregation. Some people, and in my non-scientific survey, this is much rarer, get that personal invitation like Mark's father did. Why aren't more people getting that invitation? Some of it is that it is awkward to talk about religion. We don't want to be pushy or come off as judgmental or provoke others' judgment against us. We don't want to be those arrogant proselytizers we have all encountered. But when people tell me their stories about finally arriving at a UU congregation, the story often ends with, that Sunday, when I finally figured out where the congregation is and worked up the courage to step into a room full of strangers, I saw my neighbor, or another parent from my kid's soccer team, or someone I volunteer with, sitting 2 rows ahead of me. Had they only told me that they attend the congregation, I would have showed up a lot sooner. And that part of the story breaks my heart. Think of all the people who could find a spiritual home here or resonate deeply with the message of love, but haven't discovered us yet. How do we spread our values and beliefs, touching the lives of people who are told they are thrown away, unworthy, and unlovable? What does it look like to spread our good news to those who might be searching for it, to those who might need to hear it? We do this in our actions and in our words. I don't know you all, but if you all are like most UU congregations that I know, you likely have the actions part down. You bring your values with you to work and family, community involvement, and friendships. You use your time, talent, and treasure to make the world a more just and loving place. Evangelizing with words is more challenging for most of us. It's a growing edge for me, too. It's helpful to think about the invitations and recommendations we're already making. When I discover a great restaurant or watch a good movie, I tell people about it without hesitation. This congregation, all of our congregations, provide more sustenance than a delicious meal and provoke more deep thinking than a film. Yet most of us are much more hesitant to recommend it. Why don't we share our good news of our faith with people the way we share so much that's so much more trivial? For me, part of the hesitation is the questions that come. We invite questions if we talk about our faith and values and the existence of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tullahoma when the opportunity presents itself. When a coworker asks about our weekend on Monday morning, when we reference something that we learned here, or, as happened to me recently, when the cashier at the Waffle House sees me all dressed up on a Sunday and asks how church was. If we choose to engage, the questions come. You know what? What do you believe? How can you have a church that doesn't all believe the same thing? To be prepared for the questions, we need what's called an elevator speech. It's a couple of sentences that you could get out in the length of an elevator ride that says who we are, what we're about, and why people should care. I encourage you to create one if you don't have one already. What is it that is meaningful to you about your faith and this congregation? What is it that keeps you coming back here? How has this community given your life meaning? How has it saved your life? Here are some examples for inspiration. From Richard Hewitt, a UU layperson in Vancouver, Washington. Unitarian Universalism is a democratic, pluralistic religious community which encourages each individual to develop a personal religious philosophy and which emphasizes social and environmental concerns. From Reverend Kathleen McTeague, the director of the UU College of Social Justice. If you hunger for spirituality without dogma, if you long to put yourself to work healing a suffering world, if you want a faith community that helps you deepen into life's questions, even when there are no final answers, Unitarian Universalism may be your religious home. These words are adapted from the Persian poet Rumi and are sung in some UU congregations. We believe it's a blessing we were born and it matters what we do. What we know about God is a piece of the truth. Let the beauty we love be what we do, and we don't have to do it alone. And I usually say something like this. Unitarian Universalists are a community of diverse believers. We believe that each person understands the holy in their own way based on their own experience. We are bound together by shared values, including justice, peace, and equality. We support and encourage each other to live faithful and meaningful lives. And it's kind of hard to explain, so why don't you come and worship with us sometime? The service starts Sunday at 10. And sometimes that works. Sometimes when we say what we believe, it resonates deeply with others. I never knew there was a word for my beliefs or a community that believes like I do, they tell us. And sometimes it doesn't work. Even so, talking about our faith matters. When we live our faith in words and actions, it ripples out in ways beyond our knowing. Yes, this alone will not reduce the rates of homelessness or suicide among our LGBT young people. This alone will not allow others to discover their vocation and most meaningful relationships. But naming that hatred and exclusion are not our religious values matters. As we speak up, the culture changes. More people will know that they are whole and holy, loved and lovable as they are. I haven't told you the last part of Khadijah's story that I know. The last I heard, she still struggles with her mental health, but she has found a spiritual home. She is a regular worshiper at a metropolitan community church, which is a Christian denomination founded with a special mission to serve and affirm the LGBT community as beloved children of God. She has found people to accompany her on her walk with Jesus. She has found people to affirm her and the loving God she knew all along. She has found her place and knows that she is whole and holy, loved and lovable. Again, to me, that is salvation. And I close today with one more story about our saving faith. Jonah was a 15-year-old that I met at church a few years ago. He was unhappy at the synagogue his family attended. Jonah is a curious young man trying to make sense of things, and his rabbi told him he asks too many questions. Is there such a thing as too many questions? One Sunday morning, he persuaded his parents to give him a ride to the Unitarian Church. One of his classmates went there with her family. Jonah had heard her talking at school and thought it might be the place for him. It was. He was so inspired by the first service that day, he stayed for the second service to experience it again. He stood with me as I greeted people in the entryway to the sanctuary, and as he welcomed others to the place that had been his spiritual home for an hour and a half. He turned to me and said, "That hymn we sang today said there is more love somewhere. And for me, somewhere is here." There is more love somewhere. Somewhere is here. May we share our good news with those who yearn for it. May all people know they are whole and holy, loved and lovable. May it be so. May we make it